Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Pauline Cox. Pauline has a really extraordinary knowledge of the human body and how it operates, with a speciality in women's health. Clearly, she is deeply passionate about what she does. This is a jam-packed episode with hormones, keto, intermittent fasting, metabolic flexibility, and how menopause shines a light on the way we see and treat ourselves. And as a heads up, we do talk about emotional eating and coping mechanisms from adverse childhood events, which is a very sensitive subject for many. Hello, Pauline.
Good morning, Hattie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you.
It is lovely to meet you. Would you like to start by telling everybody a little bit about you?
So I'm Pauline Cox. I grew up in Wales. I went to an all-Welsh school, so learnt Welsh at a very young age. And then at 17, came over to England to study for my first degree at University of Bristol. And that was in anatomical science. So I had a really deep love of human science from a pretty young age. And from there went on to study physiotherapy. Had a practice in physiotherapy for a number of years, specialised in musculoskeletal pain and women's health. And then went back to Bristol to do a master's in nutrition and public health. And from there, fell in love with the impact that food and nutrition and lifestyle can have on our well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, energy, sleep. Then started my second master's level in integrative medicine. So that's a little bit about my journey to where I am today and how it's led me to this very interesting field of really optimizing women's health through integrating natural medicine into the conventional way that we see healing.
I went to Bristol too, just as a complete sidebar. So yay, Bristol. That's a fascinating combination. And so you have the medical background that we tend to understand in the West, as well as functional nutrition, which just goes that it's unfair to say deeper, but it has a different approach.
It has a different approach. You're absolutely right. And yes, I love the fact that I can understand that scientific nature, the impact things have on our physiology at a cellular level, the science. And actually, I do think it's really important to have that scientific grounding for certain things, particularly when it comes to supplements and dietary habits. But then it's also really important to note that we don't always understand the impact of just being in nature, and certain things we can't stick into a randomized controlled trial and see if it works. But we just know through anecdotal evidence or even epidemiological studies that things make us feel better and we live better when we incorporate certain habits and patterns into our lifestyle.
Where are you in terms of perimenopause currently?
It's a really good question. So I'm 43. So understanding this hormonal journey that we go through, from about the age of 35, our hormones start to shift. Even the loss of growth hormone, which happens pretty early, testosterone levels start to decline. And I think I really noted that in my late 30s, that exercise was a fun thing to do, but not wholly necessary to keep a body shape. But getting into your early 40s, I felt that there's this shift in, okay, I need to be a bit more careful about what I eat now. I need to make sure I get the sleep that my body needs. I noted that if I didn't actively understand how to look after myself, it had an impact, particularly on my progesterone levels. So I've put in these really key areas of focus into my life now: stress reduction, sleep, nutrient density, really these key areas that I know have such a big influence, particularly on progesterone at this early stage of perimenopause. And I note if I have times when I'm really stressed or I'm not quite looking after myself in the same way, I feel it much more than I did, say, 5 years ago.
For those that don't know, progesterone is the calming, more relaxing hormone, isn't it?
Yes. So progesterone's a very important hormone. So we have these two key sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And if you think of these two hormones as playing in a beautiful symbiotic relationship, so estrogen drives growth. Estrogen comes onto the scene at puberty, where it causes that womanly body shape to appear in helping fat be deposited in the breast area, in the hips. So it gives us the curves. and it drives growth. So it helps with thickening of the endometrial lining. It's a very important hormone for getting in balance, because when it's out of balance, it can make us feel really not great. And progesterone has a soothing impact on the nervous system, the brain, but it also helps balance out estrogen. So in a way, estrogen's like grass that's growing thick and long, and progesterone's the lawnmower that comes along and keeps estrogen in check. So as progesterone declines, which it tends to in the early stages of perimenopause, estrogen can become quite dominant, and that can almost appear as a second puberty at that sort of first stage of perimenopause. And there are things we can do to help maintain progesterone, and there are things that we do in our life that really deplete our progesterone levels.
So what have you been doing? Obviously, stress management, making sure you get enough sleep. How have you been going about that to make sure that you're in balance?
Yeah, that's a great question, because so much of that happens in an almost cumulative form from our 20s, 30s. We don't sleep much. We don't look after ourselves so well, and we can kind of get away with it. And then we get to our 40s, and then there's this spotlight that really highlights any habits that are really showing up in our 40s. It's almost like the barometer of health, really. It shows up in our 40s if we're not taking care of ourselves and if we're not sleeping. So stress, just to give your listeners a bit of a insight into how stress impacts our hormones. The hormone cortisol has the same building block as progesterone. And so it's called the pregnenolone steal. If we're constantly producing cortisol, we are essentially stealing the building blocks from progesterone. And so the body's like, okay, we're in a really dangerous or a fleeing situation here. We need cortisol. We don't need progesterone as much at the moment. So it basically prioritizes building our stress hormone cortisol. And that in short bursts of cortisol is fine. But when it's chronic stress and our cortisol levels are just spiking all the time, this has a really negative impact on our physical and mental health. So it basically causes progesterone to deplete quicker than it should be. And this can have profound impacts on all areas of our health, from our sleep, because progesterone really helps to improve sleep so we can start to experience insomnia, anxiety, that feeling of unease. And then we have this situation where estrogen, because progesterone isn't keeping it in check, becomes dominant. So it can cause heavy periods, it can cause breast tenderness, skin breakouts, mood swings, increased symptoms of PMS, all these symptoms that we may or may not have been experiencing, but certainly that some of us are familiar with in our teenage years and early puberty. Some actually throughout our years, estrogen dominance is actually pretty common in women in their 20s and 30s as well, but it can really become highlighted in our 40s when that soothing and balancing impact of progesterone starts to disappear.
As far as diet goes,
yes,
I have my own views on nutrition, and we can park those for now because I really want to find out about yours. Keto has been all over my social media feed, emails. It's coming at me thick and fast since I've hit sort of mid-40s. It's always been around, but it feels like it's increasing in popularity. What is your take on it, and how should it be implemented, if at all?
Yeah, that's such a great question. You're right. It's become much more, I think with any dietary pattern, they can become a bit trendy. So it becomes like, wow, keto is the be all and end all. It's the answer to all our prayers. And the reality is it isn't. Now, I'm a huge fan of eating for individual circumstances and eating for different stages of life as well. So women do really well when we have metabolic flexibility. Now, that means we can access the fat on our body to burn for fuel, but we can also mop up glucose when it comes into our body by the form of carbs. This is really, really important because as we get into our 40s, we're more prone to insulin resistance. That means we're not so effective at mopping up the glucose, and so we're more prone to gaining weight. So anything that enhances insulin sensitivity is a bonus for us, which is why it's really important for keeping lean muscle mass, remaining active, and keeping that insulin sensitivity optimized. And that can be done through dietary habits too. But let's look at keto for a moment. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to burn fat for starters. That can be blocked when our insulin levels creep up, as with insulin resistance. And so really, optimizing fat burning comes from optimizing insulin sensitivity and allowing fat to become burned to use ketones for fuel. Now, I'm a huge fan of using ketones for fuel, but this can be achieved in many ways. It can be achieved through low carb, and it can also be achieved through intermittent fasting. Ketosis is just a metabolic state, and the keto diet is one way of helping people to achieve ketosis. However, for women who maybe have some issues with their liver, their bile might not be produced as optimally. They might have a sluggish liver, some fatty deposits in their liver. They might not be able to break down fat so well. The keto diet is not necessarily the right approach for them. However, a low carb diet with intermittent fasting is a great way of starting to enhance insulin sensitivity, starting to increase metabolic flexibility, and allowing the body to use ketones for fuel, particularly with the brain, which is going through this state of recalibration, this state of change, where it's pretty much relied on glucose for a lot of women most of their life. Glucose as a source of fuel and availability to the neurons becomes less because estrogen's declining, and estrogen helps to get glucose into the brain cells. It's really great to find a supplementary or an alternative form of fuel to support the brain during that time of change.
That's fascinating in that you can go at it from different angles, because keto on its own can be incredibly restrictive. If you don't follow it 100%, then you're not following it, and it can have the opposite effect of what it's designed to do. So intermittent fasting, how is it best to approach that though? Because again, it can go from one extreme to another. So it can be, oh, you must fast for an entire 24 hours, or it can be you have to do 18 hours or not at all. How would you approach that?
Again, a fascinating subject, intermittent fasting, because it very much depends on the individual, possibly the extra visceral fat or body fat they're carrying that they're looking to help shift. It depends on activity levels. It depends on insulin sensitivity. Also, you just want to make sure that you don't have any pre-existing medical conditions like type 1 diabetes, for example, or you're not taking any medication that could impact your blood glucose levels. Now, if you've ascertained that it's a safe thing to do and you're trialing intermittent fasting, I would always say start with just finding a window. Now, a window of eating, ideally, and I know there's a lot of shift workers or families who want to eat together in the evening, but in an ideal world, we would finish eating at about 6. This allows a really nice window of non-eating before we go to bed. Now, the thing to remember about eating is once we've eaten, it can take 2 or 3 hours for our glucose levels just to start to come down and plateau again. And so it's only after that time that we start to get the benefits of insulin lowering and the body going, oh, hey, okay, now I'm going to start emptying my glycogen resources, which are the stored form of glucose, depleting them from the liver, maybe some from the muscle, and then going, right, I have this amazing resource of fuel on my body called fat, and now I'm going to turn to fat to start to burn for fuel. So I always say to people, start off slow, look at maybe going from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., completely minimize snacking, which again makes a really big difference to our blood sugars and our desire for food. So I say get something really wholesome and sustainable in first thing in the morning, ideally with protein, because protein's really good for muscle building. Then have a really plentiful lunch, lots of colorful vegetables, quality protein, again, so important for us ladies, particularly as we get into our 40s and beyond. Fermented vegetables, I'm a big fan of fermented foods. Healthy carbs, starchy vegetables. You know, carbs aren't bad. It's the type of carbs and the amount of carbs and the frequency in which we consume carbs that becomes problematic, particularly for us ladies. So having something that's full of, you know, your root vegetables, beetroot, I'm a huge fan of beetroot, squash, carrots. So a really colorful plate of vegetables, salad, fermented and quality protein with healthy fats. And then something a little bit lighter at maybe 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And then fasting, you know, nothing after 6 o'clock other than herbal teas or maybe some apple cider vinegar and sparkling water. And then the next morning, again, in an ideal world, go for a walk before you eat anything. Or if it's suitable for you, you could do a little bit of exercise resistance training. And then you're having your break from your fast with, again, your quality protein-rich breakfast. That fasting period, if you're exercising, if you're going for a walk in the evening, if you're going for a walk in the morning, you're using up your glycogen more rapidly. So you're going to get into ketosis quicker than, say, if you were very sedentary in that non-eating period.
It is true, isn't it, that keto you have to follow to the letter every single day, otherwise you break that and then have to start again. But intermittent fasting, yes, ideally you get up, you go for a walk, then you have your breakfast. If you miss a day, it's not crucial, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, really, you can start this by saying, I'm going to do it every other day. So the body's very predictable. There are certain principles that our bodies just tend to follow. And one of them is our hunger hormone ghrelin. So our hunger hormone becomes very entrained to be produced when we usually eat, kind of like the Pavlov response. So even if we're not hungry, we get this peak of ghrelin and our body's like, hey, I'm usually eating at this time. Why am I not eating? So if you eat ordinarily at 8 and then you have your mid-morning snack and then you have lunch and then a 3 o'clock snack and then 5 o'clock and then 8 o'clock, you're going to get those hunger spikes regardless of whether you need fuel or not. So initially it's just about retraining the body to say, okay, now I'm eating at these set times. It usually takes about 45 minutes to shift that ghrelin spike across every day. So after about a week or two, you start to find that those hunger spikes throughout the day start to really disappear, particularly if you're having foods that don't spike your blood sugar hugely, because the greater the spike in blood sugar, the greater the spike in dopamine and the more addictive a food tends to be. So if we're finding foods that are giving us a little bit of a rise in our glucose level, but not a big spike, but they're really satiating and nutrient dense, and then we're not eating between meals, you're going to find your hunger levels really start to decline. And also one thing to remember is in the evening, when we start getting that, okay, now I could do with something. Ooh, I'm getting itchy fingers. I want to go into the kitchen and start hunting something out. Remind yourself that after that initial hunger pang, which isn't really a hunger pang, it's just that ghrelin spike coming, the ketones are coming. And I say this to a lot of people I work with. I'm like, remind yourself that ketones are coming, because once that spike goes and you say, right, I'm just going to go for a herbal tea instead, you find that your hunger very quickly dissipates. And that's when your body's saying, okay, I'm not getting anything else. I'm turning to my alternative source of fuel, which is burning the body fat that we have stored already.
The combination of the itchy fingers, desperate to go to the kitchen that you mentioned, and what you said earlier about the spotlight on things that we need to address, particularly as we get into our 40s and how we look after ourselves.
Yes.
This can sometimes come back to haunt us in the form of eating disorders or food addiction or issues that we might have either squashed or thought we dealt with, but they come back. With something like intermittent fasting, where you're paying attention to what you're eating, or even if you are just focusing on getting nutrient-dense food into you, how can you keep the kind of gremlins at bay?
Yeah, Hattie, it's such an interesting subject. I teach an 8-week hormone balancing program, and I dedicate a whole week to eating and sugar addiction and food addiction and binge eating and our relationship with food, because often our menopausal journey is worsened by a couple of things. Firstly, insulin resistance prolongs and worsens that transition. But secondly, adverse childhood events. Now, this is the stress that we've been subject to as either children or teenagers or even young adults that we carry with us in a little backpack throughout our adult life. And many women cope with those emotional events through comfort eating, drinking for comfort, turning to food to suppress an emotion or to try and fill a hunger. Now, hunger comes in many, many forms. It comes as emotional hunger, a need for connection, a need for love, a need for comfort. Hunger also comes as a nutritional hunger, i.e. we're not getting the omega-3s we need or the amino acids we need or the key nutrients we need to build our neurotransmitters, where our gut tells our brain, tick, I have this, tick, I have what I need. And then the brain's not constantly feeding back that, no, I don't have what I need. So there are those key areas that create this hunger gap. And when we look at the emotional side of that, i.e. what triggers me? What am I doing that's causing me to turn to comfort eat? Am I hungry? Am I looking for comfort? Am I bored? Am I just looking for stimulation? And then there's the actual sugar addiction side of things. And again, this is an area that I find incredibly fascinating, where our dopamine system has become dysregulated. So we've lost our sensitivity to dopamine. And again, this comes from alcohol, sugar, these foods, or even activities that we undertake that hugely spike our dopamine system. And as you get that spike, as the dopamine levels start to come down after you've eaten that first biscuit, it's that desire to bring the dopamine back up, that is that feeling of having one biscuit and that wanting, that really strong wanting for the next one. That's your dopamine coming down. It's like a dopamine withdrawal. And so the more we have of something that really spikes our dopamine, the less pleasure we get in small dopamine bumps, i.e. going for a walk or having a little healthy chocolate brownie. These become activities that don't give us that same feeling of satisfaction anymore. So for a lot of people, it's about resensitizing their dopamine system, detoxing from those really dopamine spiking behaviors, whether it's sugar or alcohol or gambling, shopping, porn. There are lots of things that really spike our dopamine. Bringing those systems back into balance and then finding the pleasure in food again, where it's an enjoyable experience, not a pain, love, hate relationship.
It sounds like there's a lot of work that goes into that, particularly if you spend an entire week addressing it. Is there anything that is a recurring theme within that comes up for the women that you look after?
Yes, I would say emotional eating, suppressing emotions, pain. A lot of women are very hard on themselves. They want desperately to make change, but because they're not addressing the imbalances, the physiological imbalances, they feel like they have no willpower. They feel like they have no strength to do this. And so they say, right, I'm making a change. And because the fuel system is not functioning at its best, and so the body's screaming out, your survival system is screaming out, you have to eat this. And so they go and eat it, and then they are racked with shame and guilt, which just further drives this feeling of, I'm no good, I'm worthless, I'm useless. And then they go and binge eat or adopt that same behavior again. And it's breaking that pattern. It's helping them to recognize it's not you. You're fighting a survival instinct within your body because your body's not getting what it needs at the moment. So let's forget about, these feelings of shame and guilt. Let's quench the thirst that the body's screaming for in terms of nutrients. Let's balance out those metabolic hormones. And then from that place, we can start looking at setting your environment up for success, looking at triggers, looking at how you find empowering alternatives to the things that you just can't seem to get rid of or give up at the moment. So it's a very important sequence to undertake, because if you skip that metabolic hormone balancing and just go to, right, I'm going on a cabbage soup diet, when that ultimately fails, you just feel awful again, racked with shame, and then you just feel deeper and deeper in this rut of, I just don't know where to go from here.
With the other 7 weeks that you look after your ladies, what else do you look at?
We look at really where someone is in their health journey, because we're all in different places. So I work with women who are, they're racked with food addiction and guilt. They have a body shape that just doesn't work for them. I always say at the very beginning, it's about addressing our mindset and looking at why we're not feeling particularly happy at the moment, i.e. our life conditions are not meeting our blueprint. This is how I thought I'd be in my 40s or my 50s or my 60s. I thought I'd be living in my prime. I'd be energized. I'd be out running and super fit, all this time to myself. Versus I feel tired, exhausted, depressed. I'm not the body weight I want to be. I'm racked with this shackling to food that I want to get rid of. And so first of all, we look at how our emotions are driving our actions and how we start to break that down to look at, okay, step by step, what are the goals we're looking to achieve that are personal to you and how we're going to be achieving them. So it's really very much about setting ourselves up for success. Then we look at the importance of balancing our metabolic hormones, understanding estrogen dominance, low estrogen, progesterone, fat burning, optimizing fat burning, nutrient density. So it takes a woman on a journey through a stage by stage, but that's very personal to that individual. So we go over things like questionnaires that they answer themselves to assess their liver function, their gut health. Do you have any of these symptoms? So we go through a little tick box, and it helps them to say, oh my gosh, wow, my liver's just not functioning at its best, or wow, my gut health, I've had antibiotics, recurrent antibiotics, I'm getting digestive issues, I'm getting bloating, my bowel movements look like this. So it helps women to link lifestyle, diet, sleep, stress, all of these things to the symptoms that the body is telling, whispering, or sometimes shouting that they're struggling, and how we can start to get the pillars, the foundations there first, and then slowly build on that to create longevity and create this pathway that's not just 8 weeks to get into a certain dress. This is about building a robust lifestyle and dietary pattern that helps them to achieve great health and longevity.
It's so important to remember that this isn't just a quick fix. This is
Absolutely.
looking forward into the rest of our lives,
Yes.
so that we can enjoy what could even be as much as half of the rest of our lives, optimally.
Yes. And I say that to a lot of women. You're at the halfway stage now. Let's be optimistic about this, because there's no reason why we shouldn't be getting to 50 and saying, I'm halfway. This is the best time of your life ahead of you. And I really think that narrative that we've put on menopause, that's perpetuated by the media and by films and possibly other professionals, that we almost feel like the best is behind us. And there's nothing more depressing than feeling like the best is behind you. So it's about pivoting our mindset to thinking, hold on, this is a whole new adventure we're entering into here. This is liberating us from a time when we're very much laying down ourselves to children and to others and pleasing, and that pleasing nature of making sure everyone else is all right. Entering a phase of our life where we're saying, okay, I've gained this wisdom, this confidence, this time now where I can say, this is my time for new challenges, time for new adventure, and freedom from those fertile years where I can just be myself.
Anyone listening to this now, what would be your advice for one key thing to start examining or to start doing today?
Aside from what we've spoken about with the intermittent fasting and looking at blood sugars is incredibly important. I feel like supplements can be incredibly powerful in supporting your journey. So many people say to me, are supplements necessary? It's only when you've tried them and you see the powerful impact that they can have that you say, well, necessary meaning what? Is it life or death? No, but is it enhancing our quality of life, our mental well-being, our sleep, our energy, our body composition, our gut health? Absolutely, yes. We don't get the same nutrients from our soil and in our plants as we used to. So our dietary nutrients are just not as they would have been 50, 60 years ago. Secondly, our environment that we live in, this stressful environment, the emotional stress, the toxic stress from the air we breathe, the toxicity in, just the waters, the food production, our bodies have a lot to deal with. And so minimizing and mitigating against this kind of modern toxic world we live in can really be aided by a really good supplement regime. And, it doesn't have to be a whole cocktail, but having, just your top 3 or 4 that support you and your stage and your journey it's transformational.
Any top 3 or 4 that you would recommend, or top 2 even, that you would recommend across the board? I'm
going to go top 3 because there are 3 really important ones. Magnesium is my number 1. The majority of women have subclinical magnesium deficiency. This is because we are inflamed. We have this increased inflammation as we get to our 40s. And so inflammation depletes us of magnesium. High blood sugars deplete us of magnesium. As we get older, we're less able to absorb magnesium. So we have this kind of multifaceted reason why we tend to have this subclinical deficiency. And with magnesium, it's important to remember that a blood test won't show low levels of magnesium, because 99% of our magnesium is in our bones and in our muscles, and only 1% is in the serum. So as our serum levels deplete, the body says, oh, hey, it's okay, I'll take the reserve from my bones or from my muscles. So we start getting cramping or fasciculations, the little twitches and around the eyes. We start getting anxiety. We start getting muscle tension and cramping, insomnia. So all these symptoms of magnesium deficiency tend to be symptoms that we kind of live with and just accept. A good quality magnesium can really help to build a great sleep regime, which again is absolutely fundamental to balancing our hormones. It can help stimulate GABA, which is our calming hormone, our calming neurotransmitter, and it almost helps to replace progesterone. It has that same impact in soothing the nervous system as progesterone has. So getting the right form of magnesium is also absolutely imperative. So there's magnesium oxide, which you might find in your high street pharmacy. And this is a very cheap form of magnesium that we tend to consume and maybe absorb 10% of. You want to get a form of magnesium such as magnesium glycinate or biglycinate. And this is the magnesium that's very readily absorbed by the gut because it sees it as an amino acid attached to the mineral magnesium. Now that passes the blood-brain barrier, and the glycine part of the magnesium glycinate or biglycinate helps to create a deep sleep. It also helps to build collagen, and it also helps to build our main antioxidant, glutathione. So that form of magnesium is just wonderful for women. And if you take one with B6 in it as well, the combo of magnesium and B6 is great for hot flushes and for PMS. So a really nice all-rounder for women. The second supplement I would say is an omega-3 fatty acid. Absolutely essential for bringing the inflammatory levels down and for optimizing our mental well-being. We tend to not get a great deal of omega-3 in our diet just simply because we're not eating as much oily fish as we used to, and we have a high dominance of omega-6, which is quite pro-inflammatory. So I would suggest having a really high quality, either a fish oil, or if you're a vegan, you can go for an alternative like an ahi flower algae combo. There's a really nice one called Catch Free by Wiley's Finest. And ahi flower it's a unique British sustainably grown plant that has a very unique fatty acid profile, very different to something like hemp or linseed, which is rich in omega-3s, but a different type of omega-3. We need that superior, intelligent source of omega-3s that really supports our mental well-being, but something that's going to increase your EPA levels and your DHA. And finally, it's a toss-up between vitamin D and zinc. I'm going to go zinc. Zinc's really important for women's health. It's very important for protein synthesis, so muscle, hair, nails. It's really important for supporting the endothelial lining of the vagina. So it supports the microbiome of the vagina, the collagen formation. So it helps with internal dryness. It helps to maintain the structural integrity of our abdominal organs as well as the vagina itself, which can start to thin as estrogen levels decline.
Thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure and such a source of information and knowledge. So thank you.
You're so welcome, Hattie. Lovely to talk to you.
You too. Take care.
All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye. You can find Pauline on Instagram at Pauline J. Cox and on her website, soandarrow.com. Follow us on the podcast app of your choice and hit subscribe. And please leave a review as it helps others discover us. You could also subscribe to our newsletter by visiting our website, realmenopausetalk.com. Scroll down and hit subscribe. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.